Hi, we continue in Genesis 18 with one of the most amazing scenes in all of Genesis, the unbelievably extravagant meal scene that old Abraham and old Sarah put on in the heat of the day for three strangers who show up at their tent. So, as we begin to look at this scene, and we're going to look at it in detail from verses 5 to 8 today, I want to both note the details as we go, but also the context of this in terms of eating and in terms of hospitality. Because in the journey we've seen with Abraham and Sarah since chapter 12, this is the first time they've had visitors. And when we look back, we see they've only engaged with outside people a few times, with Pharaoh and presumably some other Egyptians back in chapter 12, with Melchizedek and the other kings to the extent that Abraham dealt with the other kings and his mercenary army of 318 back in chapter 14. And other than that, only the people in the household, only Sarah and Hagar, and he hasn't even spoken out loud to Ishmael as far as we've seen. So it's been a very quiet situation for these many years, now 14 years that they've been on this journey together. So this is the first time they have visitors, and it should be no surprise then. Finally, company, let's bring out a big feast, as if they've been waiting for this for all these years. But of course, it's not just a matter of three strangers, it's a matter of Abraham perceiving that Yahweh is visiting here in the presence of these three strangers, although it's never said that explicitly, and we don't know that for sure. But most scholars assume that, and his falling on his face certainly seems to suggest that, although it could be good hospitality for strangers in any event, and certainly to show vulnerability in the event that you thought the strangers might have been suspicious. So we don't know whether Abraham and Sarah thought that this was God in the form of human beings or not. How would that even make sense to their head, that this invisible God is suddenly here in the form of three separate people or one of them or whatever? We don't know that, and the text doesn't explain it at all to them. It only explains it to readers a little bit in chapter 19 when we get to the Lot side of the story. So as we enter this, we don't know, but the feast is going to unfold. And as we do, I want to look back here on the right side of the screen at the relatively rare times that we've seen eating and drinking in Genesis. And I just focus on eating here. If I'd included drinking, I could have included Noah getting drunk in chapter 9. But curiously, there it said he drank, but did not say he ate. So I've color coded these into green, that eating that brings people together, and red, eating that pulls people apart. And a couple of them are a little ambiguous, but we'll look at that more as we go. And I want to note that the primary verb here, hel, to eat, is 66 times in Genesis, and a full third of them are in the garden story. I wasn't doing key words so much when I was back there. Maybe I'll go back and do a little supplement and post that. One of the nice things about doing videos in contrast to writing a book is I can just put another video in anytime. So be prepared to have this series and more as we go. So anyway, a third of them of the word verb to eat is in the garden story, and the flip side of the 24 times in lechem, bread, as a synecdoche for synecdoche for food, 24 times in Genesis, but 15 of the 24, 5/8 of them are in the Joseph story in 37 to 50. So we see how few of them we've seen so far, and in fact, perhaps to our surprise, this scene here where Abraham stood by them under the tree while they ate is the first time we actually see people eating, since the woman ate the tree in the garden and gave some to her man, and he ate. Because these other things are talking about eating, but not describing eating. I hesitated to even put 319 in there because it's one of many references to talking about eating, where it isn't actually done. But I thought this was so important because it highlights the premise here: by the sweat of your face you will eat bread, and then bread becomes, as I noted, synecdoche for food in general. So already by that time, we've moved away from the idea of hunting and gathering to agricultural food as the basis for people's eating. And so we saw in the situation with Abraham and Melchizedek, I made this a positive one because Abraham refused to take anything from Melchizedek except for what the young man ate, and so that was to create peace after the war there. Now we have our scene here, and then we'll of course have the parallel that we'll look at with Lot's feast. So we have two meal scenes in short succession, clearly highlighting that they're meant to be read together. Then we'll see a number of chapters later, after Abraham's servant is sent back to the old country to get a wife for Isaac, and after successful negotiations, he stays and has a celebratory and departure meal with them. Then we have the negative meal where Jacob succeeds in stealing the birthright from Esau for bread and stew, and a similar one where he tries to get the blessing from his father, which he does in exchange for the goat meat and all the other tricks that he plays on him there. Here in between was King Abimelech making a feast for Isaac and Rebekah, and so they ate and drank at the end, and again in a peaceful situation. And also here with Jacob in the midst of the Laban situation. But negatively, we'll see Joseph's brothers sit down to eat while their brother Joseph is about to be sold to the Ishmaelites. And then there's one here where it's only positive in the sense they're out of food, but this is Jacob trying to hold his family together by sending his sons to Egypt to get food. And then finally, this clear separation where Joseph tries to separate Benjamin from the other brothers by feeding him by himself and the other brothers by themselves. And the Egyptians, of course, eat separately because it's an abomination for them to eat with the Hebrews. So a very explicit situation where eating tears people apart. Here, though, Abraham curiously does not eat with them. And although in the last video I showed a number of classic artistic images of this, some of which do show them seemingly at a table together, others show the angels in the sky like cherubs, or coming from the distance like monks, as we saw from the film. But the text clearly indicates that he's not eating with them. He's standing like a waiter serving them. So let's put up our comparison of this scene with the scene in the next chapter, 19, where the two of the three visitors, now described as angels, come to Sodom. And we'll see there are parallels on both situations. They wash their feet, a basic provision of hospitality, but the details of the eating are very different. So to get that, we're going to have to go into our passage and see all the details of this. And then when we get to chapter 19, we'll see how simplified what Lot offers there is. And I'm not going to go over it now, but I just want to draw attention to what I went over last time. There are a whole series of themes and topics that within Genesis 18 and 19 that could be discussed. I went over this list last time. If you didn't see that, I encourage you to look at that there. Another aspect that we looked at last time was how the theme of inside and outside these various places plays out throughout our whole section. And today, it's the relationship with the tent with Sarah there. So we'll put this up and let's jump into our scene. So as we saw last time, Abraham offers a very modest and humble provision, which is typical, to offer little and give more, of course, better than promising great and offering little, but also under the premise that he offered too much. People would think it's disproportionate and say, oh, no, 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 don't bother. So instead, he simply had said, wash your feet, rest yourself in the tree, let me bring a little bit of bread, and then we'll see what happens. Let's look at the details of what he actually offers and then what happens. So let me bring a little bread here. Literally, and take please. And I didn't put all the translation differences in here, but I did here, as I was noting, please is one of the key words in the entire section, but also especially here. So he's asking them politely to take a little bread. And the word fat here for little is only here in Genesis and only a couple other places. Literally, it's something like a crumb or just a bit, as if a piece of matzah had been broken and you just had a little crumb of it. Obviously not a meal. So certainly he's offering them more than that, but he's expressing it in the smallest possible unit he can. So that you may refresh yourself, or literally support or sustain your heart. Another one of those examples where the Hebrew uses a body part to express something more physically than the New RSV does. Refresh yourself versus sustain your heart is a clear difference there. And after that, you may pass on, echoing the Hebrew word that we saw earlier. So they're Hebrewing, they're passing on. Since you have come to your servant. And as Wenham notes, it's as if he has said, it is my pleasure you have come, you have made my day. And we note up to this moment, the visitors haven't said a word, and we have not seen a thing from their perspective. We've not seen what it looks like from their view at all. And now they finally speak, and they speak in one voice, do as you have said. We don't know if that's one or all of them together, but there it is. And now it jumps into gear. Abraham hastened, and I know I'll go back to the key words thing. They're not key words because the same word isn't used a lot of times, but language of hurrying is clearly piling on here. He ran, he hastened, make ready quickly, ran and hastened. So we see all the hurrying around. Remember, this is in the heat of the day when they would be under the tree. So he runs into the tent to Sarah, who we'll see in the next scene is at the tent entrance when the two men after the meal speak to Abraham, and make ready quickly 3 measures of flour. Hurry here. So let's take account of what's being said here. Sayim here, as Westerman notes, is meant to indicate the best. It's really this word that indicates the best, soleth. That's the kind of choice flour that is used for divine offerings in Leviticus and for royal provisions in Solomon. So it's not only the best flour, 3 measures. A measure here, as Wenham notes, is perhaps 2 gallons, roughly the size of a peck. So we have to try to envision what's happening here. When Abigail brings grain to satisfy David's extortionate threats on her husband Nabal, for all of David and his men, she brings 5 measures of choice flour. But this is 3 measures for 2 people. So here's an image of a sack of flour. Imagine turning all that. Now you've got to grind it. Then you have to knead it and make it into cakes, which is to say, like pita bread. It's not the word matzah here, which is used elsewhere, but it's basically like this: a big stack of pita bread. And this stack is not nearly as big as it would take. It's hard to imagine how many pita cakes you could make from these 3 choices of flour: 100, 200, 300, and that's what he's telling her to do right now. So then, while she's busy with the flour, he ran to the herd, and we know they have animals here. And he took, and notice the theme of took and gave back from the garden, and there are many garden echoes we'll see in this chapter. A calf, which is literally a son of a cattle, a ben bakur here. So as my note says, it doesn't say anything about the size of it, but it's a child one. It's a ben. So here's the first step. First, you got to take it from its mom, as you can see here. The narrator adds details. It's tender and good. The word rock here next describes Leah's eyes in 29:17, or it can be translated a number of times, a number of different ways rather. Sometimes it's frail or other things. So presumably the calf is not being described as frail, it's being described as tender, although obviously the narrator doesn't know what the quality of the meat is. It's simply to say it's the best they've got, tender and good, and gave it to the servant, whichever the servant, or literally the youth, ha'anar here. That could mean Ishmael, as the Midrash suggests. We don't know of any other young men, ours, around, so it would make sense that he would give it to Ishmael, but it's interesting that he's not mentioned. Who hastened to prepare it. And let's just pause there for a moment. If you were given a live calf and told, there are guests here for lunch, get this ready, how long do you imagine it might take? Let's just slow this down for 1 second. So we saw the cow and its baby. Now we have this guy. This is from Bearded Butchers, which I fell down the rabbit hole of on YouTube looking at this stuff, who will, if you watch the video, will show you how to skin this gigantic cow. And unfortunately, the one that they're having here is a calf, so it's a little smaller. Then you have to cut it into all these pieces, and the Bearded Butchers videos have hundreds of thousands of hits of people watching him take his sharp knives and cut these cows into various pieces. And once you have all the pieces, of course, then you have to have a fire or an oven of some kind to cook it all up in the heat of the day. Is the servant doing that all by himself? Because it says the same servant, or is it Abraham here? I guess it's Abraham, because he gave it to the servant who's preparing it. And now Abraham takes curds, which is say halev here, which could be yogurt, as you can see here, homemade yogurt, or it could be something like cottage cheese, but probably yogurt, and fresh milk, which you have to get from the cow, as you see here. It's not like they pulled it out of the fridge. And the calf that's prepared. Notice it doesn't say a steak, but apparently the entire calf, and now attributed to Abraham. It's easy to elide the presence of the servant and imagine it's just the old man Abraham and his old wife Sarah who are doing this enormous amount of cooking while these 3 visitors sit there and watch. And when it's all ready, it says, and he set it before them, and he stood by them under the tree while they ate. I hope they gave him a good tip for all that. It's really just an astounding scene, and we can easily read over it, but it's astounding not only in the quantity, not only in the old people out in the heat, but in the rareness. It's the only meal scene that's described like this in the entire book of Genesis. Now, the imagery of some of these things we can hear elsewhere. For example, in Deuteronomy 32:14, we hear in the celebration of how God took care of the people, nursed them with honey from the crags, which him being Israel, oil from the flinty rock, curds from the herd, milk from the flock, fat of lambs, etc. Everything is present here except the wine from the blood of grapes. And of course, they would not likely have wine in the desert. And the authors are understanding enough of all those things, despite the fact that Noah seemed to be able to plant a vineyard, but not in the place where they are. So they have everything but wine set for a royal feast, set to celebrate the provision, ironically, of what God provides to them. And now it's what Abraham is providing to God's messengers, although we don't know that that's what's happening. And after they quietly eat their meal, apparently in silence, they speak and ask the question, where is your wife Sarah? And that's where we'll pick up next time. See you then. Bye-bye.